some moments don't just change a relationship, they expose everything that's been hiding underneath it. And this one didn't come from a fight or a secret or some dramatic betrayal. It came from a child who didn't even understand what she was about to unravel. So ask yourself something. What happens when the most innocent person in the room says the one thing no adult was brave enough to say out loud? For 9 years, Blake Shelton wasn't just a friend or a mentor or another familiar face. He was Uncle Blake. Birthday parties, video calls, summer trips, all of it. He was woven into the fabric of someone else's family so naturally that nobody ever questioned it. Nobody thought they needed to, until one night, one sentence, 2 tiny syllables that shifted everything. Not because anyone meant to hurt somebody, not because a boundary was crossed on purpose, but because a little girl saw someone she loved hurting and reached for the most powerful word she could think of. The one word she believed had the magic to fix it. The kind of word that's supposed to heal. The kind of word adults spend years pretending doesn't matter. And in 3 seconds, it stopped being a nickname or a joke or a casual connection. It became something real, something raw. Something impossibly complicated. A marriage that once looked untouchable suddenly didn't feel so solid. A friendship that once felt safe suddenly didn't feel so simple. Because when a child gives a title to someone, it doesn't come with conditions or explanations. It comes from the heart, without hesitation. And, unlike adults, kids don't care about politics, timing, or consequences. They just say what they feel. So here's the mystery that nobody involved was ready to face. How did one word turn years of quiet emotional history into a crisis overnight? How did a single moment force everyone to confront a truth they'd avoided for nearly a decade? And why did those simple words leave one person in tears and another walking away without saying anything at all? Because sometimes the most accidental moments are the ones that reveal everything. And this one? It didn't just reveal a secret. It shattered the silence around it.
Before the headlines, before the rumors, before anyone cared who was dating who, there were just 2 people trying to survive the chaos of a brand new show. Kelly Clarkson and Blake Shelton met on the set of The Voice when nobody had any idea what it would become. And right from the start, they weren't just coworkers trading friendly jokes in between takes. They built something rare. The kind of friendship that forms when you're thrown into long days, tough decisions, and the weird pressure of being funny, charming, and insightful on command. It wasn't romantic. It never even leaned that way. If anything, everyone around them understood instantly that they were siblings in spirit, loud, blunt, sarcastic, always calling each other out, always lifting each other up. They bonded over music, family, and the kind of country kid upbringing that makes you real before you're famous. They were the safe place in each other's workday, the laugh in the middle of a bad rehearsal, the shoulder you lean on without ever having to say you need it. And as the seasons rolled by, their bond outgrew the show itself. They didn't clock in and clock out of the friendship. It followed them into holidays, dinners, and those late-night conversations that start out dumb and funny, but somehow end up changing how you see everything. River Rose didn't know any of the backstory. She didn't care who won what award or how many cameras were pointed at her mom. She just saw a man who made her laugh, listened to her stories, and treated her like she mattered. Blake became Uncle Blake before anyone had time to label it. He held her when she was tiny, teased her when she learned to talk, and showed up for birthdays like it was the most natural thing in the world. He wasn't a guest. He was family in the way that matters most to a child. Constant, kind, predictable, present. And for a kid growing up in a world where grown-up problems were always just one headline away, having someone like that meant stability. It meant comfort. It meant love that didn't change just because life got messy. For years, it worked. A deep friendship, a happy child, a chosen uncle who never asked for anything in return. And nobody questioned it because nothing about it looked dangerous, nothing looked complicated, nothing looked like a threat to anyone. But everything got complicated when another broken heart entered the picture.
Blake Shelton and Gwen Stefani didn't fall in love during some picture-perfect moment when everything was calm and easy. They met when both of them were standing in the wreckage of relationships that had fallen apart in ways neither expected. Blake was fresh out of a painful split with Miranda Lambert, and Gwen was trying to steady herself after her marriage to Gavin Rossdale ended in a messy public storm that made every headline feel like a spotlight she didn't ask for. They weren't looking for anything, not romance, not comfort, not some dramatic start over. They were just trying to make it through each day without collapsing under the weight of it all. And sometimes that's exactly when two people collide, not because they're ready, but because they're broken in the same direction at the same time. Their connection didn't explode into fireworks overnight. It unfolded slowly, in quiet conversations backstage, in texts that started off casual and then turned into confessions at 2 a.m. They understood each other in a way that surprised them both. They shared the same ache, the same loneliness, the same fear that maybe they didn't know how to build something healthy anymore. The world, of course, didn't see any of that. The world saw two famous people smiling on red carpets, holding hands on camera, making music together that sounded like healing wrapped in harmony. To fans, it was a fairy tale. The country boy and the pop icon writing a new chapter that looked effortless. It was beautiful, it was unexpected, it was romantic, in that glossy way only celebrity stories can look when you're not close enough to see the cracks. But real life had edges the cameras never caught. Because dating someone while you're still piecing yourself back together means you're constantly balancing love with unresolved hurt. There were expectations, schedules, families, and the heavy pressure of being the perfect match that millions of strangers wanted to believe in. And behind every photo of them looking flawless, there were nights filled with doubt, exhaustion, and fear that neither of them wanted to admit out loud. Still, they held on. They tried. They rebuilt. Because sometimes the bond that grows out of chaos feels stronger than anything you ever planned. They didn't set out to fix each other, but in a strange, unexpected way, they kind of did. And through all of that, one thing kept getting overlooked. Blake's new life wasn't separate from Kelly's. It constantly overlapped.
Blake Shelton didn't just show up for work, film a season of The Voice, and disappear until the next one rolled around. He wove himself into Kelly Clarkson's family life in a way that felt natural, almost unavoidable. Holidays, birthdays, little weekend barbecues that weren't glamorous or staged for Instagram, Blake was there, not as a celebrity guest, but as someone who genuinely belonged. He was the guy who brought laughter when the mood dipped, who sat on the floor playing games without worrying if anyone snapped a picture, who made kids feel like they were seen instead of just tolerated. And River Rose noticed. She didn't grow up with the idea that Blake was some superstar. To her, he was simply Uncle Blake, the reliable grown-up who always kneeled down to her level, listened to her dramatic stories, and showed up without fail. She attached herself to him in that quiet, determined way kids do when they recognize someone who makes them feel protected. She held his hand in crowded rooms, dragged him into family photos, and announced his arrival like it was the best part of her day. And Blake didn't just play along, he melted into it. But behind all the laughter and comfort, there was something deeper sitting in Blake's chest. Even though he joked about not having kids of his own, he'd hinted publicly that it wasn't because he didn't want them. He talked about it like a dream life never made time for, something he thought about late at night, something that made him wonder what kind of dad he might have been if timing or choices had lined up differently. He never framed it as regret, more like a soft acceptance wrapped in a longing he didn't quite know how to express. So when River ran into his arms yelling his name or looked at him like he hung the moon, it hit him harder than anyone realized. It wasn't just cute or sweet or flattering, it filled a space in him he didn't talk about, a space that didn't disappear just because he smiled through it. What nobody understood at the time was how much emotional groundwork was being laid without anyone noticing. A child creating memories that meant warmth and safety. A man quietly absorbing the feeling of being needed in a way he'd never fully experienced. A friendship turning into a chosen family with bonds that weren't fragile, but also weren't simple. They weren't setting up a complicated future intentionally. They were just living life, building traditions, and loving each other in the easy, everyday ways that don't feel dangerous at all. Until suddenly they are. But cracks were forming, even before anyone said a word.
It started as a totally normal night. Homework done, pajamas on, kids winding down. Kelly was juggling bedtime chaos like any parent does, while her phone buzzed with a call from Blake. Nothing dramatic, no warning, just the usual check-in from someone who'd been part of their family's routine for years. She answered, distracted, and because both hands were occupied with wrangling kids into bed, she hit speaker without thinking. What she didn't realize was that Gwen was in the room on the other end, quiet, listening, not announced. Then Little River stepped up. This kid who'd grown up seeing Blake as more than a celebrity, more than a coach on TV, as a person she felt safe with. She said goodnight the way only kids can, simple, messy, honest. And in that tiny voice, she tried to comfort him, because even children can sense when someone they care about isn't smiling the same anymore. And then came the moment that froze everyone. River called him Dad, not as a title, not as a replacement, but as something that slipped straight out of her heart before anyone could correct it. The room went still on both ends of the call. Blake didn't laugh it off. He didn't correct her. He didn't try to become the cool, unbothered version of himself that cameras expect. For a second, his voice cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to show that the word hit a place he never talks about publicly. Because Blake had always wanted fatherhood, but life kept throwing him everything except the version he imagined. And now a little girl, someone who wasn't biologically his, but emotionally tied to him, had spoken to truth he didn't know how to handle. He didn't tell her to stop. He just said goodnight, in a voice that sounded less like a country star and more like a human being caught between love and loss.